has been the Texas AgriLife Extension Vegetable Specialist for the District 12, serving 21 counties all the way from Brownsville to Eagle Pass. He previously coordinated the IPM program for citrus and vegetable pests as the IPM agent for Hidalgo and Cameron counties from 1989 through 2002. Dr. Anciso's area of research and extension education is vegetable pest management, vegetable production, and food safety on the farm, known as Good Agricultural Practices, GAPS for short. He has written several scientific articles and popular articles on vegetable pest management and food safety on the farm. He is the lead trainer for the Produce Safety Alliance, which provides the grower trainings required by the Produce Safety Rule. He also represents Texas on the National Good Agricultural Practices Committee and United Fresh's GAPS harmonization effort that addresses GAPS food safety in produce. And so we are honored to have him share his knowledge with us today. So without further ado, here is Dr. Juan Anciso with you guys.
Thank you, Karina, and good afternoon, everyone. And I would probably say that it's going to be rather informal. So if you do have questions, put them in the chat. I know that Jeffrey had asked me to do a presentation on prepping or preparing for your garden here in the fall. So this will kind of cover as a general training or general pieces of information of maybe planning your garden for this fall. So we can certainly start off by having a good garden plan. Basically means keeping records. And those records, of course, should include, when you should plant. There's terminology that I use as a vegetable specialist, and hopefully as a gardener, you'll also learn and understand them. And that is basically cool season vegetable plants and warm season vegetable plants. And that basically refers to the type of vegetable plants, the type of weather that they prefer. So, and I'll go between the different ones that, fall into the cool season category and ones that fall in the warm season category. Again, when we say cool and warm, we don't mean freezing for cool weather, and we also don't mean excessively high heat, 100-degree or even above 95-degree weather, so we're talking about kind of those temperatures, basically between for cool season plants 50 to 85 degrees, and warm season plants basically from 60 to 95 degrees. So they have their plants, and not only just vegetables, but other plants have ideal temperature requirements for their growth. The next thing would be, what varieties should you plant in your area of Webb County or wherever you may be? And I'll give you maybe some pointers of where you could find such things. The next thing in planning your garden, planning for it, is are you going to use transplants or seeds? Obviously, we can use seeds for all these vegetables, but sometimes it's more optimal for your garden situation to use transplants. And oftentimes I'm talking about you you making your own transplant and not going to the stores and buying the transplants that they have there, because it's quite possible that the varieties that are for sale may not be the very best varieties, and you won't have success. Last but not least is where you should have your garden, and kind of talk about full sun and partial shade. So those are going to be some of your key things in having a successful garden, and in this case here in the fall. Some hints, keep notes, try to keep as much notes, because by you keeping notes, you'll recognize that this vegetable variety did well or it didn't, or which varieties are doing better for you and your circumstances. And if you can also map out where you planted your project, meaning understanding whether you're using a raised bed or naturally in the soil, where you're putting certain types of vegetables. So next year you don't come back and plant the same thing in the same location. So keep records as much as possible. Be sure to order your seeds early enough to have on hand, and especially if you're growing transplants. Because if you are growing transplants, you basically got to plan ahead at least a month, and in some instances by 2 months, to have the transplants ready to plant in the ideal planting window. So ordering seeds early. I know that people often like to go to some local nursery and buy seed packets there, but I would encourage you to look at the other seed companies that are available online and order. That's the only way you're going to find many of the varieties that we recommend through Extension and through the Master Gardener program across the state. Because again, if you go locally, they're going to have basically the seed or seed varieties of that do well in other parts of the country, and certainly not in Texas, and definitely not in South Texas. So I would say ordering seeds would be important. And many of these websites, you can order a few seeds, meaning 10 to 50 seeds of a particular variety. The only warning I would have there, because I order a lot of seeds myself, is be careful that you just don't order a few seeds and where the actual shipping costs are way more than the seeds that you bought. So pay attention to the shipping cost, and what it would take to make it, I guess, to a degree cost effective or worthwhile ordering seeds through the web. So just pay attention to the shipping cost. I know I've bought like $30 worth of seeds, and the shipping cost was like $45. So just be aware of those things that can happen. Also, you want to group your plants wherever you grow them in your garden by their watering needs and fertility needs. I'm not going to go much into that at this point in time in this discussion or training, because it's a little bit more complex. But I just want you to realize that some vegetable plants require a whole lot more water than other vegetable plants, and by the same token, fertility. So if you put these two plants side, say one requires quite a bit of water, one requires much less, and you plant them side by side and you're watering them equally, well, one will probably suffer by not getting enough water, or the other one suffering by getting too much water. So again, understand that. More information can be found by going to various resources. Of course, one resource would be the Master Gardener Handbook. Other resources that I use to kind of cover myself in this area is KNOTS, KNOTTS, Vegetable Handbook. And it's really a handbook with lots of numbers, lots of tables, but it really can help you find which plants have certain watering needs and fertility needs. So next is basically trying to figure out what varieties to grow for your area and what varieties for your location. In this example, this was a fact sheet that I was able to find. I'm not sure if you all have it or don't have it, but it's something I had found on the web. But basically, just for a brief overview, just realize that there's information out there that you can get from Jeffrey, and maybe even in this case, this is the Bexar County Master Gardeners that have provided this information. So you can see that, for example, beans, bush beans, you have Blue Lake 274 as a variety that's, recommended for the hill country, San Antonio and Laredo and South. Of course, it kind of gives you the dates, the window of when to plant these by seed and by transplant. Normally, people do ask me, is this when should you plant transplants? I tried to tell them, you want to stay in those windows. Those are the ideal windows. So maybe you could plant your transplant much later, in that window, and your seed much earlier in that window. So you still want to stay in that window. So as you can see, there also talk about seeds preferred, planting by seeds or transplants preferred. So I will go over that a little bit as well, which vegetables do better with seed by seed and which vegetables do better by transplant. So I'm not sure if we have any questions in the chat, but Karina, if we have any questions, I'll be glad to answer some questions at this point in time.
No, there aren't any questions so far.
Okay, I'll keep plugging away. So I'm not sure if they're in Webb County. I don't believe there's a formal Master Gardener program, but Karina, you can correct me if I'm wrong. But or not aware that y'all might have a website with information. So I thought possibly the closest a bit of information that might be applicable to you all in Webb County would be the Bexar County Master Gardener website. And of course, it's for Bexar County, but they have a lot of resources. They have a vegetable gardening a vegetable gardening site and a lot of pieces of information of irrigation, planning for a garden. So what I'm trying to basically say, there's a lot of information. And there's a lot of Texas information. And there's a lot of information, somewhat available for South Texas. So we don't have to go to a website that's for Indiana or Illinois or California. So you're always trying to look for that piece of information that's going to be closest to your area. And if you're all as a group are starting to form an association or a website, that would be, a great place for y'all to put y'all's information that what works best in Webb County.
Yes, we're still working on finalizing our association.
Okay, well, very good. I'm glad to hear that, and wish you luck in that. And I hope to see a Master Gardener Association in Webb County. So with that, since we are going into the cool time of the year in Texas, I will talk about the cool season vegetables. And again, if we back up in the previous slide and the previous two slides, there's some specific windows. We'll take that first bush beans window of August 13th to September the 30th. So there can be some very specific windows for a particular area, but I like to try to generalize, what it means to us as Texans, when these vegetables should be planted. So for our cool season vegetables, we should be planting them either by seed or transplant. Again, there's a big range there depending on the vegetable, but basically I talk about growing those vegetables between Labor Day, which is September 1st, which is around the corner, all the way through Valentine's Day. So you have this great big window in South Texas primarily to be growing these cool season vegetables. Just be aware there could be some vegetables that have a more precise window for planting. But as a whole, the general take-home message here is we're planting these vegetables when it's cool, the coolest months of that are found here in South Texas. Also be aware to be successful in the garden and having your garden be successful that, some of these do require fertility, especially nitrogen, whether you provide it from an organic source or from man-made synthetic fertilizer like a bag that you might buy at a store that has, numbers on it. Just be aware of it that there is fertility required to be successful. Oftentimes I see vegetable gardeners, especially beginners, that basically just believe that planting the vegetable, watering it is enough to grow a plant and be successful. So that's one area that many gardeners uh, don't really focus on, or maybe lack the information and resources, but certainly be aware that there's a fertility requirement for them as well. So that's cool season vegetables. Now we'll move to warm season vegetables. So in South Texas, meaning south of San Antonio to me, we basically have the opportunity for two windows to plant these warm season vegetables. The first window is that spring window when things are starting to warm up. And normally I say we're probably for the most part in the clear from a severe cold front after Valentine's Day. And we can go all the way to about tax day, April 15th. We don't want to go too much past tax day because we all know our summers are brutal. And our summers could begin as early as the first part of June. And so many of these vegetables won't have enough time to complete their growth cycle, and they're going to get caught right in the middle of a tremendous heat wave, and they will suffer. So again, so there's that window of not too early, not too late. And then in the fall, in some instances, we can grow many of these warm season vegetables, not all of them. Basically, what I call the peak of the dog days of summer, which is August 1st, all the way to the peak date that is hurricane season. And that peak date for hurricanes is considered to be September the 15th. So, somewhere between the peak of heat and the peak of hurricanes is that other window that you could possibly grow some warm season vegetables and have something for Thanksgiving. And maybe if you're lucky enough and a cold front didn't come in December, have some warm season vegetables for Christmas. Again, just like the other vegetables, remember about fertility. So I'll start talking about which vegetables, as you're planting your garden, you should consider only using seeds and not transplants. So just real briefly for the warm season vegetables, beans, peas, okra, and sweet corn. You could have okra in a transplant, you could have beans and peas in a transplant, but I really think that because they're such large seeds, they just do much better getting started in the soil. Now, as we're planning here in the next few weeks to grow things there in Webb County, and you're going to grow some of these cool season vegetables because this is their window for them. You want to grow these by seeds: beets, spinach, radish, turnips, mustard green, leaf lettuce, carrots, fennel, dill, garlic, dandelion. These cool season vegetables do very well being planted by seed in the garden. Again, you can get transplants of many of these, or start your own transplants of these, but these are really kind of considered the vegetables that you could pretty much say there's no great benefit by using transplants. So these can be by seed. Vegetable transplants that you could, that oftentimes do much better as a transplant than they do as a seed. For warm season vegetables, basil, eggplant, peppers, tomatoes, watermelons, cucumbers, squash, and cantaloupe. So oftentimes these are the things you're going to see at the stores as transplants that are available for you to plant. Again, possibly they could have the right varieties for your area, or maybe they don't. So just be aware of that. Cool season vegetables that that do well as transplants, whether you grow them yourselves or you buy them at these nursery places: broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cabbage, Chinese cabbage, cauliflower, head lettuce, celery, Swiss chard, collards, kale, kohlrabi, onions, leeks, parsley, and cilantro. And so oftentimes some of these cool season vegetables do better as transplants mainly because their seeds are so small. You just have better luck germinating them in a transplant scenario than you would in the soil. So those would be examples of where you'd want to start your garden with those types of transplants to be successful. So before I go on to the vegetable transplant definition, do I have any questions, Karina?
No, there aren't any questions, but Jeff has linked the handbook, the Knots handbook, and
Okay,
other resources that that you have helped put together for the master
awesome.
garden.
Awesome,
So
awesome, awesome. And this PowerPoint presentation, I mean, I'll give it to y'all, and y'all can print it or yeah, digitally send it to the participants. That's not a problem. So that you don't have to be taking notes. So just real quick, as gardeners, sometimes we get, what is a, I mean, I don't even know why people would even question what is a vegetable transplant, but I do want to give you the definition. So basically, it's a plant that started in a protected environment, and that could be a greenhouse, a hotbed, a cold frame. Basically, you're putting it somewhere where it's going to be ideal, but it's going to be protected from the environment, from the weather, and then later is planted in the field for further growth. And so you have some pictures there. Some people use the styrofoam cups. Some people have trays, and that's just basically a plant out of its tray, just showing the root development and the plant development of that particular transplant. So a transplant is something that you're growing somewhere in a protected environment so it can basically get a good start. And there are different types of transplants. There you could do bare root transplants. That means they're not in a container, they're not any soil media, they're actually coming. You could start them in the soil. Examples of these are onions, cabbage, and broccoli. And so if you did order onions, a Texas 1015 onion, from Dixondale Farms, and to plant in your garden, which you can do, they would come as bare root, and you would think that they would do terrible because the roots are shriveled and look bad. And but nope, you put them in the ground, they develop new roots, and the plant takes off. And cabbage is kind of the same way. When you bare root cabbage and broccoli, they might be wilted when they'll wilt when you transplant them, but they'll give them some water, they'll pop back up and I'd probably kind of consider them like cactus. You just throw a piece of cactus on the ground and water it, and it takes. So cabbage and broccoli are kind of the same. They can't get too dehydrated, otherwise they're dead. But they can be transplanted bare root and containerized transplants. Examples there are tomatoes, all your types of melons and watermelons would be containerized transplants, not bare root. If you try to bare root even a tomato, it's going to die. It's not going to have enough roots and basically an ability to quickly grow the roots and stay alive. Containerized transplants, I've kind of gone over it. There's, many types, mini plugs, styrofoam cups, seedling trays, there's peat pots. I mean, there's so many different ways to do a containerized or seed transplant and via this method. Growing media that does come up when people talk about transplants. Obviously, if you're using a tray or a cup or any other type of container, soil is not uh, the ideal growing media in that container. Only if you're growing bare root vegetables where you have a cover, they're being covered or they're being protected, then you can dig them out of the ground would be okay. But if they're in some sort of pot or tray, do not use soil. You'll have to use some commercial media, and usually these commercial medias have peat moss, vermiculite, perlite, which is going to be all that light, fluffy stuff that you might see when you open a garden media bag. And some might have some limestone, some calcium, and nutrient charge, which basically is some nutrients there for the plant to grow. Again, you can make your own homemade media, and that basically be, we're going to go in gallons, a gallon's worth of peat moss, a gallon of vermiculite, a tablespoon of superphosphide, and 2 tablespoons of ground limestone. You could probably leave out the ground limestone, but the other three would be pretty critical in making your own homemade media and growing your things. Always, if you're going to reuse your trays or pots and they're, I guess, plastic or hard enough, I guess it would be if you're reusing them, be sure that once you're done with them, to clean them out with a 10% bleach, Clorox, or, to basically disinfect from any microorganisms that might remain there if you plan to reuse that pot. Seed considerations. And again, that's just basically percent germination versus vigor. So oftentimes when you buy a seed package, there's an example there of a can, and that's basically saying Swiss chard has 94% germ. So that basically means that if you took 100 seeds and planted them out, 94 probably will germinate. 6 will not. So that's just telling you how many will germinate. And so just be aware of it's never 100%. So when you do transplants, you not going to have all the plants are not going to come up. That's just the way it is. There's always some germination value that's never 100%, but you do want to be using seed that has at least 80% germination. 80 to 95% is what I consider the norm in germinating vegetable seeds. If it's much less than that, well, if it's 60%, 50%, 40%, well, you're basically saying 1 out of 2 plants are going to grow, the other half is not. So just be aware of that. Seed vigor can often be confused with germination. So you could have low germination, but high seed vigor, meaning a few plants come out, but they're beautiful, or even if a bunch of plants come out, let's say 94% pop up, there might be 10% that don't look so great. And the other 90%, are much bigger, look healthier, stronger, a thicker stem, or however you want to consider it to be a better quality seedling. So there's a vigor and then there's germination. So I do believe there was some questions that popped up, Karina.
Yes, one of them. Where can we find or buy the ingredients to make our homemade media?
So they would be at a nursery store, that vermiculite and peat moss. They sell them individually. Your superphosphate would be there as well. So if you want to make your own media, you still have to go buy that peat moss. You still have to go buy that vermiculite. I would just say go ahead and get the garden mix, and it's already mixed for you. But some people want to do it themselves. So yes, all that stuff would be located at your local nurseries. I don't think the big box stores like a Home Depot and well, maybe they won't have the super phosphate, but they would have the vermiculite and peat moss. So they are available to purchase, I would say, locally. Any other questions?
Uh, no, not at the moment. We just do have a participant that mentioned the Ace Hardware in South Laredo has the cheapest vermiculite.
Oh, there you go. You see, so it's there locally. Thank you.
Thank
Next would be watering and fertilizing. And again, I'm just talking about the transplants. I'm not talking about your stuff in your garden yet. You irrigate as needed. That's, a great big encompassing term that means, means a lot of things, but certainly means that you're probably going to be irrigating 1 to 3 times depending on the temperature. So this vermiculite and peat moss, it really drains well. It holds moisture to a degree, but it doesn't keep it super wet and super moist. Like, for example, if you use a soil. So it is draining out enough because the little seedlings need water, but they also don't need excessive amount of moisture because then you'll have seedling disease or microorganisms that will start to attack it. So in some cases, I've seen some cases where I used some media that was super, I will call it fluffy, super light, that man, it was hard for me to keep up with the watering needs in those trays. So, I've also had a learning curve of trying to find the best media that works for me, that works for the vegetables that I'm often transplanting. And the ones that I'm usually transplanting are watermelons. I grow my own watermelon transplants and transplant them out in the field for studies. And like I said, I've purchased different formulations, and one formulation was like, we'd water it one day and the next day they're almost wilting, and it was just kind of a ongoing battle. So again, uh, those are the things you're going to have to work out yourself to find the media for the vegetable and the environment. In my case, it was my greenhouse was super hot, and it was evaporating really fast. Again, there's a lot of things there, but be ready to be watering your transplants. I'd probably say safely 3 times a week to keep them going. Okay. If you are using a watering wand, make sure you have it on the soft shower. And I mean, it's even soft shower can be too much and basically move or blow out your seeds from your trays. That has happened to me as well, because there's no doubt that even a soft shower can be a strong enough force to get them out. So again, focus on that you're not, that it's really soft and not really moving anything when you're watering it. Uh, there's other ways of watering your these things in pots or trays, and that's basically dipping them in a water bath. Just make sure that water bath is clean, meaning, there's it's pretty fresh. It's not old, and microorganisms can get started. And again, once these seedlings emerge, you want to use of that high phosphorus. So all plants, when they're small, they have a high requirement of phosphorus, not nitrogen, and you do get plant response and growth from them. So if you use a starter fertilizer with at least 18% phosphorus, just use about a teaspoon per gallon of water and just water it in, and you're okay on the rate on the fertility part. I'm not going to go too much into structures, but there's all kinds. There's these trays that you plug in, warms things up. You can make your own. That one on the right-hand side is like a homemade one with so there's all kinds of structures that you could do around the home or in your back patio or wherever else you might have to protect them from the environment. Um, a high quality transplant, of course, is going to be one that is looks healthy to you, meaning in green. It's not yellow. It doesn't have leaves starting to dry up and fall off. You also don't want them to be too tall or spindly or leggy. For example, the picture of that tomato transplant on the right-hand side might be considered too spindly, too leggy, too tall. If I transplant that out in the field, the wind's going to just blow it over and break it. So when these things are tall and spindly or leggy, they just don't have good protection from the wind. For example, in that tomato transplant, I might plant it much deeper than that container. I might go all the way to where that first leaf comes out to give it some strength. So again, a quality transplant has the right size and the right stature to withstand the environment. You don't want them in most cases. As a perfect example, if you have transplants that are already flowering or they're at the store and you want to purchase them and they're already flowering, that is probably they're way too old, meaning that probably they're root bound. Their roots are not formed correctly. They're all twisted up. They're kind of a little bit off on the wrong growth cycle. So you don't want to be transplanting any of these vegetable plants that flower when they're flowering. And again, you want to pay attention if there's any insects or disease. Time to grow them. Okay, this would be basically how long prior to planting them in the field. So some cool season crops like broccoli, cabbage, and cauliflower, you might have them in the transplant container for as long as 2 months. So you got to have these things in those containers 2 months in advance prior to that ideal planting window to take them out to the field. Warm season plants like tomatoes, peppers, and eggplants, a little less than 2 months, about a month and a half would be kind of like the range that they're ready to go out to the field. And other crops like the melons, like cantaloupes, watermelons, and squash and cucumbers, they can be ready in a month. So, so there's different lengths of time for these vegetables being in their transplant container. And and also once you are about to plant them in the field, you want to harden them off. That basically means exposing them to, so you've had them in a greenhouse or in some sort of structure protecting them. They're not used to the wind. They're not used to the full sunlight. So you harden them off by leaving them in the trays and the pots and just basically exposing them out to the sun for about a week, anywhere from 3 to 7 days, just where they're sitting out in the weather that's being exposed, and they may even wilt. Actually, that's kind of ideal. You want them to wilt a little while you have them out there and you're hardening them off. Then you bring them back to your greenhouse or your protected environment and you water them. All this effort is basically making the plants become acclimated and getting used to their environment. And again, you want to do this to have success in transplanting them in the field. Transplanting, so you have a picture there on the left-hand side where that watermelon plant is wilted, and you have a picture on the right-hand side where the plant is not wilted. So a lot of it deals with, how much moisture they got already and how much moisture they can easily pick up. So we don't want to be transplanting in the middle of the day when it's hot. We want to transplant a lot of these vegetables in the morning. Often I find it ideally if it's cloudy out there, no sun, that helps with what we call transplant shock. And they all live versus 50% live and 50% die. So again, you want to do everything possible to have them be successful and live while they're being transplanted. All right, planting your garden. You want to plant your garden somewhere where you have full sun. Yes, you could have a picket fence around that's going to block some of the sun, but that's still considered full sun. I can assure you that this is my garden back in the 1990s, so that's a different house than I live in. It received more than 8 hours of sunlight. So when we say full sun, a garden in full sun, we mean that those plants are going to have direct contact with the sun for at least 8 hours of the day. So that would be a garden that's in the full sun. And there are people that, you can have some shade. That doesn't mean that you have to be looking for a spot in your home or in the location you're planning to plant your garden that is just out of that has that might have a little shade. So these plants can take a little shade. So shade here in this example would not be a problem. They've been successfully growing basil and many of the other herbs in those high dollar raised beds that they have there for look. So so you can have trees and buildings around. In this case, the trees are not competing with the plants for moisture and nutrients, so they grow quite well. So again, this would be an example where there it's basically full sun, a little bit of shade is not a problem. But this example here is an example where someone decided to put their garden, again, they put a structure to keep the varmints out, keep the raccoons out and possums and anything else that may want to attack your garden, which is awesome. But of course, they did put it right under their trees, which is awesome also because you're not working in the sun, you're working in the shade. However, the example here being that if you did do planting your vegetables here, there's going to be too much shade by the trees, by the surrounding trees for your garden. Those tree roots are underneath where that location is at. So they would be pulling nutrients and water from the vegetable plants and they would suffer. And I use this example because, these individuals always suffered with their vegetable crops and always kind of complained. And while it was, in my opinion, beautiful and in the shade, it was just not in the right place for the vegetable plants to be successful. I guess in conclusion, a garden plan is best when you keep your records. So try to keep records as much as possible. I have my little handy dandy notebook here to my right hand side of me of my desk where I keep my notes for everything that I do, especially with my trials. But it's always good to go back and review what worked or what did best, because sometimes just some things get all foggy in your brain and you forget. So keeping records is great. Hopefully you understand and the windows for warm season versus cool season vegetables. Again, look for the resources. They're going to tell you the best appropriate planting dates for Webb County or wherever you might be located. And hopefully you have a better understanding of seeds and transplants, and you're able to determine, when to use one or the other. And of course, now you're aware that if you are planning to plant a garden, it's not something that you go on tomorrow and go grab seeds. So, there's, some, some planning in advance. So, maybe plan 1 to 2 months prior to what you're going to do your plan of attack for your garden, and you have a better understanding of sun versus shade. So you want a sunny location, where you're at least getting 8 hours. That's going to be, good for those vegetables. And just be aware if you are going in the soil and you're near large trees that it will compete with your garden plants, vegetable plants. So with that, that's my final slide part of my presentation. So Karina, if I have any questions, I'd be glad to answer them at this time.
I don't think we had any questions. So while we're kind of wrapping up here, if you do have a question for Dr. Anciso, go ahead and put it in the chat box. But this session will wrap up our 2024 Summer Lunch and Learn series. I would encourage each of you now, or those that may be watching the recording in the future, send us, if there are some ideas or some topics that you would have would desire us to cover. Feel free to shoot them to us. We would be glad to look and see how we can incorporate that into our next summer's Lunch and Learn. So, but Dr. Anciso, again, I appreciate you so much for bringing this to us today. Karina, thank you for being with us and looking at the chat and hanging in there with us. But if no other questions I see in the chat box, we will conclude today. Thank you so much, Dr. Anciso.
Thank you, guys. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Y'all have a good one.
Bye-bye.
Bye.